It's 5:30. So I will call the January meeting of the Deschutes Public Library District Board to order. Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome. We'll be getting off to a great start this year. Our first order of business is that we have our consent agenda, which includes our board minutes from December 11th and the district disbursements. Did anyone have any changes or questions about these two items?
I am not seeing the sample motions. Was that on the email?
It was, it was an attachment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would entertain a motion. Someone would choose to make one.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Oh, before we do that, as secretary, I can take roll on that. I have to take roll.
Oh,
Okay.
On the consent agenda. So, Malcolm.
Aye.
Okay.
Yes.
Tucker.
aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Trimble.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Okay, that's the only time I have to do.
Okay, thank you. Where the public meeting laws changed,
And that was
so the requirements on the minutes changed.
the way you do consent agenda.
It's the way you do consent.
What, and I was so excited about that, I didn't listen to the, who did first and second on the motions.
I moved.
Okay,
And I did second.
Okay, you were poised, ready. Okay. So we are going, oh, do we have any members of the public online?
No.
We do not. Okay, and we have no members of the public present, so we will dispense with the public comment section. And we are going to move Robert's educational presentation on library facilities down to the bottom of the governance process list because he had a conflict. So,
and asset protection will come after that.
and asset protection will also. Yes. Okay, so first up, we have Emily doing a education presentation on intellectual freedom, which you came in a little bit late because we were all talking about it right before you arrived.
Also, I never told Emily that I moved her up to.
I didn't, I know,
No.
it was a surprise.
And you didn't tell me so much.
I know. I
Aren't
just-
you guys glad that I got here early? I am gonna.
Cause I was saying, oh, you don't have to show up till 6.
Well, we could just have Greg talk and like go into great detail.
I just need to, do I share, there we go.
And take your time, since we gave you zero notice.
I love this.
Yeah, it's
And
nice.
when I say we, I mean me.
Well, the one joy here is that I have done this presentation a time or two, so I think I'll be okay. As long as the technology works, which is always the question mark, right?
I'm gonna let you share. Oh, yeah, so it's working.
There we go, okay. Thank you, well, thanks for having me, I'm glad I gotta be, first, actually, because, it's just nice to get in front of y'all and have the chance to talk to you about probably one of my favorite topics, intellectual freedom. I know a few of you have heard me speak on this before, but some of you are new, or new to the board, and also it's so good to get a refresher considering what has been going on in our world. So, some of this might feel familiar. At the end, we'll have some updated statistics. So the first thing that I want to share, assuming that this works, there we go, is anytime we talk about the law, you have to tell whether or not you're a lawyer. I am not a lawyer. So this is not legal advice. This is legal information that you should have in front of you as members of the board and part of the library community. But if you need legal advice, you need to contact a practicing attorney. I'm not your person. I can give you my thoughts, but it's definitely not legal advice. That said, why am I the person that is talking to you about intellectual freedom? Obviously the last bullet I'll do first. I'm the technical services manager here at Deschutes Public Library, which means that I manage the collections and the collection development policy. So, and a big part of that collection development policy is making sure we uphold intellectual freedom. So, that's the immediate reason why I'm here. But beyond that, I have some roles across the state. The first is I've been a member of the Intellectual Freedom Committee with the Oregon Library Association since 2020. So for 5 years, kind of been tracking what's been going on. And actually I was the chair of the committee for the last 3 years, just segueing off here in September, partially because we have buildings and you all need me to be doing other things other than chairing this committee. But I am still on it and I'm still tracking as a member now. The last thing, which is new, and I'm going to share the details of this in the next slide, I was given the honor of attending a program through the American Library Association called Law for Librarians. The intention of that program was for the Office of Intellectual Freedom from ALA to select 1 or 2 members of the library community from every single state. So there were between 80 to 100 people that were selected to go to this training. The hope was that we would get hands-on legal expertise and training and information from ALA's lawyers. So we had Deborah Caldwell-Stone there. We had their own legal representation, Sarah Lambden, and a couple other kind of heavy hitters in the intellectual freedom world. They're training us for 2 days, and our role is to train the trainers. So we get to have all this awesome information from the actual lawyers to then bring back to our state. And our hope is that we are sharing that information with the community at large, including our own board members, but also then I can go across the state, and if people need support or help, I can train them. So getting chances to do different types of training across the state so that we can really infuse this knowledge more deeply than we were before. So that happened in May of 2024. So the first place to start is what is intellectual freedom, and I start with the boring definition so that we can get it out of the way. So the boring definition, intellectual freedom encompasses the freedom to hold, receive, and circulate ideas without restriction. Viewed as an integral component of a democratic society, intellectual freedom protects an individual's right to access, explore, consider, and express ideas and information as the basis of a self-governing, well-informed citizenry. That is the most boring definition of all time, and it is so much more simple than that. So ultimately, it is the unrestricted access to information and ideas. So pretty simple to say, I am given the right to access information. Beyond that, the more philosophical definition is it's the freedom to decide what you read, what you learn, and how you choose to learn it. And my favorite way of defining it is just reverse engineering the words. It's the freedom of your own intellect. So it's being given the freedom to choose what you think, to choose what you learn, to choose how you represent that knowledge in the world. And it's part of our First Amendment rights. So now is our history lesson, our rudimentary history, taking us back to high school civics class or middle school civics class. But it is important to know that we are tied directly to the United States Constitution. And that's something that folks don't always know, the direct tie, that this is a constitutional law, essentially, that libraries are tied to. So in order to get there, let's start from the very, very beginning. So when the Constitution was created and ratified, one of the things that was required at the time with our founding fathers, they would not sign the United States Constitution without the addition of what we know, the 10 amendments. Of course, there's now more, but at the time, there were 10 amendments that the founding fathers said, we will not create a government that does not protect what they called the civil liberties. And those civil liberties are, what does it mean to be a free human being in this new country that we are creating? So those are your rights as a human being living and breathing in this country. And it was so important to them that they wouldn't sign it without setting those freedoms in the foundation of our country. They were very thoughtful in how they picked out and wrote those 10 amendments. And the first point of thought was, one means most important. So the First Amendment has a lot of elements to it, which I think, again, back to middle school civics class, I found frustrating. Why is freedom of press mixed in with freedom of religion, which is mixed in with freedom of speech? Like, couldn't you guys divide that up a little bit? But the thought was they're all the most important freedoms, so they all get to be number one. So our tie is to one of those number one most important freedoms, which is the freedom of speech. So how do we get there? Freedom of speech, when the Constitution was formed, obviously people challenge, what does freedom of speech mean? And as those challenges happen, they go through our court system and through to our Supreme Court, who then sets precedent, and that precedent continues to define and refine what it means to have freedom of speech. So after all, a couple hundred years now, we have quite a bit of precedent that helps us understand what freedom of speech means. Among the precedent that has happened, the courts have held that in order to have freedom of speech, you have to have freedom of informed speech. So in order to have speak eloquently, you have to be able to have the information to share what it is that you want to say. So in order to have freedom of informed speech, courts have then held you have to have freedom of information. In order to have freedom of information, you have to have freedom of access to information, free and open access to information, which is now where libraries are immediately tied to the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The case that we are most directly tied to is from Kramer versus the Bureau of Police in the town of Morristown, where the courts held freedom of speech is considered a quintessential locus of the receipt of information. So a foundation to that First Amendment right. So beyond that, the other part that we know as being a government entity, and we sometimes forget that libraries are government entities. Like, you say that in a public setting and people say, wait, what? The reality is that we are a tax-based organization, which means that we are a government entity. We get our money from our community and we have boards that are elected, right? So there are certain elements that we have to remember that help define us as government, and we are a government entity. So as government entities that have a tie to First Amendment or constitutional rights, we get lumped into what are called public forums. So under the definition of public forums, there are 3 types of public forums that exist in the United States. And the first one is actually what we are. So, for the second one, the first one is a traditional public forum. So a traditional public forum is what we think of when we, like the founding fathers first existed, and an elected official would be on a stage in a park somewhere, and you could actually go and say hello to that person and yell at them and tell them what you think about the government, right? We don't really do that so much anymore, but that right still exists. And so places that are considered traditional public forums would be like our parks, right? There's a reason why people are able to petition and do rallies and whatnot in our parks, because they're our most unlimited access to a free space to express your feelings and to invoke your First Amendment rights. The second one is a limited public forum, which is what libraries are. So the definition of a limited public forum is an agency that has a direct tie to upholding your First Amendment rights and your constitutional rights, but that in order to do that, we have to be able to set certain restrictions. So the restrictions that we are allowed to set are called time, place, or manner restrictions. What that looks like in a library is, for example, we are allowed to say that, yes, this building is yours, it belongs to the community, and it is a place where you are absolutely allowed to invoke your First Amendment right. However, we can't keep the building open 24 hours a day. We also have to be fiscally responsible with taxpayer money, and we have to follow OSHA and BOLI, and our staff have to be able to go home and go to sleep. And so we are allowed to set hours where that building is open. So that would be a time restriction. A place with restriction would be, yes, that building is yours as community members. And in order for us to get information out to you, and to get the materials back on the shelves, we need space for our staff to be able to accept the returns and process them and get them in order and put them back on the shelf. And if members of the public came to the back spaces, the staff spaces, and started browsing the shelving carts, that would actually hinder the rights of others access to that information, because it would take more time for us to get it out. So we're allowed to say, yes, it's your building, but there are certain parts of the building that you can't be in. So we can set staff only. So that would be considered a place restriction. And the last is a manner restriction. So that's any sort of behaviors that happen in the space that would be infringing on the rights of other people to use that space. So an example of that would be noise, right? Like somebody can't bring in, a Bluetooth speaker and just randomly do a dance party in the adult nonfiction, right? Like that would be disrupting to other people that are trying to use that space. And so that's where a patron code of conduct comes into order, is setting those manner restrictions. But beyond that, what you cannot do, regardless of what public forum you are, is that no government agency can engage in viewpoint discrimination. So if you're gonna set a restriction, it can only be a time, place, or manner restriction. It cannot be a viewpoint-based restriction. Any regulation of protected speech activity must be reasonable. So back to the time example, we can't say that the library is only open an hour, right? That's unreasonable considering we have 6 branches and 100 staff. But we can say content neutral time, place, and manner restrictions. And then all government agencies are subject to the laws barring employment discrimination, and the agency cannot discriminate on the provisions of services to the public. Basically saying there are certain protected classes in our government, right? There's 7 protected classes, things along the lines of sex and gender and race, that you cannot discriminate on in both the employment of who gets to work in your organization, but also how you serve your public. And those are tied to all government agencies. And then the last, just to close the loop, the third is a non-public forum, which is funny because it's still a public forum, but those are places like police departments, right? They are absolutely required to uphold your constitutional rights, but you're mostly not allowed in that area. It is, in order for a police department to function as it needs to, it really can't allow public in there beyond, say, the lobby. And so that would be considered a non-public forum. So knowing that we are tied directly to the Constitution and that we are considered a limited public forum, ALA helps us figure out what that means as a library. And so ALA has provided us with the Library Bill of Rights, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with. But those are the doctrines and the statements that we have to follow in order to be upholding our First Amendment requirements. So some of those include materials are provided to all, materials represent all points of view, we challenge censorship, back to that we cannot have discriminatory practices to our public, we are open to all people. And something that often gets lost in the conversation about intellectual freedom is this applies to all of the different ways that you learn. So things like if you are doing a program and it is open to the public, you cannot restrict access to that program. And if you provide meeting rooms for individuals to use, you have to remain neutral, content neutral on who can use that meeting room. So that you cannot set any sort of restriction on access to that meeting room once it's open to the public. And then the last is privacy and confidentiality. In order to really invoke your rights to information, you sometimes want to learn things that you don't want people to know that you're learning about. And so in order to really be able to exercise that freedom, you need to be protected in your privacy in order to feel open and comfortable learning whatever it is that you are desiring to learn. I put a link at the bottom. ALA is really fantastic about giving interpretations of the Library Bill of Rights. So if there's ever a moment where you're like, well, what does it mean about like internet filtering for kids or whatnot, then the interpretations are a great place to go and check, because they'll kind of go through some of the more nuanced questions that often come up around intellectual freedom. I'm calling out this particular statement because when we get into the challenges, and we will get into the challenges, but many of the challenges that are existing in our world today are under the umbrella of people will share that they are protecting the kids, right? And that is a really difficult statement because I don't think there's ever anyone that says they don't want to protect kids. But how they're choosing to go about that challenge is in fact illegal. So for public libraries, courts have held repeatedly that a public library is not allowed to act in, the legal term is in loco parentis, which means in placement of the parent. So the role of a librarian is to advise and assist users in selecting information resources, but parents and only the parents, the legal guardians, have the right and responsibility to restrict their own child's access. So we cannot restrict access to a child in any form to their information rights. Going back to the Constitution, these are human rights, right? The civil liberties. They're what it means to be free in this country, regardless of your age. You are given those rights at birth. And so anybody has the full access to the library. The only person that can restrict that is that child's legal guardian.
Are schools assigned a different role?
Yes, so schools do act in loco parentis for the 8 hours that your child is in a public school, yeah. Which is where things can get often very confused, right? Because we get lumped together and we are actually very different in what our legal requirements are. So let's dive into what is censorship, right? Because this is another question that comes up a lot. I hear a lot of like definitions that are not the actual definition, and when I mean definition, I mean the legal definition, which is restricting your access to information. So I kind of jumped the gun there, but we're gonna talk a little bit about the process or what happens here at Deschutes when a question about materials comes up. So the first thing I want to call out is an expression of concern is not a challenge, and that's not censorship. And actually that's very natural, right? Like we know that there's so much information out there, the likelihood of any one individual finding any one title that they disagree with is pretty high, right? I can go into the library next door and find things I disagree with. I think all of us can. And so when that happens, oftentimes members of our public, knowing that we serve the public, like to go to the agency that they found that and they share their displeasure, right? But that is not a censorship nor a challenge, right? If the individual is saying, I found something that doesn't suit my world view, can you help me find something else? That's just an expression of concern, right? Where it becomes a challenge or a censorship attempt is when that individual says, I found something that doesn't fit my worldview, I don't want it, and nobody else should. So when it leaves the individual and it starts to become an impact to the rest of the community, that's when censorship and challenge exists. For us, we don't consider something a challenge unless somebody actually fills out the request for reconsideration form. So what that means for us is, like, we have had individuals that will be very persistent in their request to remove materials from the library. But their request comes in the form of emailing 17 different people and hoping to get a different answer, or calling Lynn or calling Todd. But the answer is, we have to follow our policy the same way every single time. It protects us legally, and it tells that person that we honor their needs, and we will in fact look at that material. And so we don't look at a challenge unless somebody fills out our request for reconsideration form. We don't review the title. We don't put it under any sort of assessment. Nothing happens when somebody is just being persistent. They must fill out the form in order for a challenge to exist formally in our library. The other thing that we'll hear people say is, well, it's not banning, you can still buy it on Amazon. And I want to truly define what censorship is. So banning and what banning is. So book banning is a popular term that is really not encompassing of what we're experiencing nationwide. So book banning is the last element, right? After somebody has put in a formal request for reconsideration and the censorship attempt has existed, when and if that library were to actually remove that material, that's a banning. And that does happen, but that doesn't encompass the entire experience, which is that a censorship attempt has occurred. The other thing is that with this statement, it's not banned, you can still buy it on Amazon. The actual definition of censorship is that you have lost access to some information that you otherwise had free and open access to. So if there was an information point that I previously had unrestricted in some way, and then an expression of concern happened, and then that information is now less available to me, that's the definition of censorship, and that's what we are not legally allowed to do. The fact that somebody can buy it on Amazon puts restriction on that access, right? They may not have access to internet. They may not have the funds to buy it. Also, Amazon might not have it because they're a private organization that gets to decide what they sell. And so now you've set in at points where the access has been denied in some way or restricted. So what I'm actually going to talk about is the types of censorship, because these are all of the different things that libraries are experiencing, and the one that people often think about is the red one, removal, right? That's the banning. But there's a lot of different ways that people are going about trying to restrict access to information in our country, and all of these would be considered censorship. So the first one is restricting. So I like to go through a couple scenarios here. I don't want you to get rid of it, but can you just like make sure that it's behind the desk? Or that my kid has to fill out a form, or they have to get some sort of permission slip in order to check it out. If that child had access to information prior to that moment, you are now putting a barrier in place for that child to have access. That restriction, that extra step has in fact created censorship because their access to information has been denied or restricted in some way. Well, I don't want you to get rid of it, but can we just take out the bad parts? Like, can we just, cover it up or white out? And I laugh about this because actually my previous library, we actually had a patron that went through and whited out all of like the bad words. So you laugh, but it does happen, and then that would still be considered censorship, right? You have taken away the full breadth of that information and diluted it in some way beyond what was the original intention of the author and the original information that that person had access to. I don't want you to get rid of it, but can you just move all of that to the adult section? And that happens a lot. That's a really common theme that is happening in censorship attempts. And the reality is that we place items where their intended audience is. And that is a very objective process. So intended audience is created, it starts with the author. And the author says, I created this book for this age bracket. Then the publisher will take that work and give it to reviewers. And those will be librarians, other authors, other professional reviewers. They will read that item and confirm that that title fits within that intended audience of the work. Then it goes back to the publishing agency and it actually goes to their legal team because they want to make sure that they're not doing false advertising. And so they will make sure that that work does in fact fit the intended audience of the work. So when we put an item in a kids section, it's because it has been objectively defined as a kids material. In order to move it, if you moved it to an adult section, then that child is less likely to find it, right? That, I mean, they may browse the entire library, but they likely will not. And now you have created a barrier that has restricted their access in some way. And then the last we are familiar with because of what has happened in Central Oregon in recent years, which is relabeling. So saying, can you just put a warning label on the item in some way? Can you put an explicit content, or can you, say, rated R or whatnot? And labeling systems and rating systems are intended to tell somebody, don't check that out. That might not be good for you. That might not be right. And any sort of system where you make someone think twice about whether or not they wanted that information, or feel bad about checking out that information, or not want to carry around a book that has an explicit content label, so they choose not to. Those are all barriers that you put in place when that information used to be free and open and would all be considered censorship. And then of course, the last is removal. So in order to protect ourselves from some of the challenge situations that we're seeing happen across the country, DPL does, as I mentioned, we have a request for reconsideration process that we follow, but there are some elements that we have recently updated in that policy. The first is that we do request that the individual read or view the entire material. We're often seeing individuals pulling statements out of context, and that goes against the legal guidelines of the Miller test. And we'll get into the Miller test in a minute, but the Miller test says that you have to accept the work as a whole. So if somebody wants to challenge the material, pulling something out of context, dilutes the full breadth of what that material is trying to offer. Again, we require that anybody that wants to challenge materials must fill out a reconsideration form. We won't accept a challenge any other way. We will not remove anything from the collection while the item is under review. So even to remove an item for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, that information access has been denied to the rest of the community for that amount of time. And that time period where it is not in circulation would be considered censorship and would be illegal. So it will stay in circulation while it's under review. We asked them to tell us what the concern is, and part of that, we'll get into the next slide, but we have a requirement to uphold anti-discrimination laws. And so we do want to know what the concern is and making sure it's not about a discriminatory action, which many of the challenges that we're seeing across the country are. And then lastly, we have updated certain customer requirements. We require that the individual must have a DPL resident card. There are organized groups, organizations that are putting mass challenges in across the country. So we're saying you must be a taxpayer in this district in order to challenge our materials. We won't accept a challenge from a group or an organization. So again, organizations are actively putting forward mass numbers of challenges and we won't accept it. You have to be an individual in our community that is expressing this concern. We also have set limits on the numbers. So again, you've maybe seen stories of like 36, 14, 18, 100 in Texas, there was 700 books getting challenged at one time. So in order to protect ourselves from getting 700 books at one time, we say that you have to fill out one form at a time. Every form is only for one title, and you can fill out one per month. So it gives any one card holder up to 12 opportunities to challenge a material, which is more than fair. And I want to highlight, we did add an anti-discrimination statement to our collection development policy. This ties directly to Oregon state law anti-discrimination policies, which is that you cannot discriminate against someone due to their protected class. And part of that discrimination would include protecting their voices and their allowance to have their stories told. So if somebody is purposely saying, I don't like this material because it is by or about a protected class, that does put us in threat of being discriminatory if we remove it. And so making sure that we uphold our anti-discrimination laws in all of the ways that we serve our public, including access to stories and information. So a lot of people say, well, the First Amendment isn't absolute, right? So like, there are parameters that you may exist where something should be censored, and what are those? We have to, again, follow the law, right? And the law is super clear. So the first one is the Miller test, and the Miller test is a 3-pronged test that has to be followed by, it has to go through a court of law. So if somebody comes to us and says, why do you have this book? It's obscene. We know it's not, because no judge has made a judgment identifying that book as obscene. If a judgment had existed, we would already have pulled it, because that would have been illegal for us. However, when it goes to a court of law to look at obscenity, they're looking at 3 things. The first thing is if the work as a whole would be seen through the masses, through the general public, to be patently offensive. So if everyone in our general populace would see that material and all agree that it is patently offensive in some way. The second is that work as a whole is indecent and sexually inappropriate. So if somebody is saying like, it's obscene because of violence or vulgar language, it's not. The law only applies to sex. Apparently, violence and language is never obscene under the court of law. The third one, the most important one, is again, the work taken as a whole, which is why we require people to read the material in full, because it's part of the Miller test, has no literary, scientific, artistic, or something value. I have to remember scientific, literary, artistic, or contemporary value. So we wouldn't buy anything that's none of those things. That's the point of literature and stories and books. So it would be very difficult for us to say that any one of our items is not literature, has 0 literary value, right? That's exactly what we do, or 0 scientific value, or 0 artistic value. So overall, I can say library materials would indeed pass the Miller test should it go into a court of law. The next is child pornography, which is difficult, but it is important because many of the challenges that come up are individuals saying, well, you're handing out pornography to kids. Well, first off, I have to say regular pornography is legal. You're allowed to have pornographic materials, and actually, we have erotica in our collection, and we have a huge romance section. We should even call it out. We love different types of stories for different reasons, and regular pornography is legal in the United States. Where it's illegal is when it goes into children. And the law is super clear that it has to be an actual child. It's not an illustration, and it's not a passage in a book. And so when people are coming to us and saying, well, it's pornography, there's no pornography in our library, no child pornography. That's deeply illegal. If it's a graphic novel, an illustration does not meet the definition of the law. An illustration is not considered child pornography. The last ones I want to call out do come up in this conversation. Interestingly, defamation and slander. So what will happen is librarians will be attacked, right? Like as a forefront of like this, you know, a talking head of IF in Oregon, somebody could easily come to me and say, you're, you know, a pedophile or you're child grooming. And interestingly, that is legal. So you cannot defame my name because I'm doing my job. And so when or if we were to get some level of attack on an individual, it would be our role to protect them and actually seek legal back to the individual that's calling that out, because that is not allowed in our country. Fighting words is important just because it will often come up of like, well, what about hate speech? And unfortunately, hate speech is very protected. It has gone in front of our courts many times. And ultimately they've said, you have a right to tell somebody that you hate them. You have a right to express hate. That is part of your free speech. Fighting words are where that language is going to create immediate physical harm. So this is the one where you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. It's not the fire element that's the problem, it's the crowd. It's that in order to get out in a dark space with stairs, somebody could get trampled and get hurt on the mass exodus in that fear creating situation. That's why you can't say fire in a crowded movie theater. The last two, the government is allowed to redact anything under the Patriot Act. So at any point, if they say it's national security, they can redact it. And then the false advertising is important because if you recall the intended audience of a work, when people challenge us with why did you put that material in a kids section, we are again upholding First Amendment rights because they would get sued if that was false advertising. We know it is the intended audience because it's already gotten that review via legal. Okay, takeaways is we cannot restrict access based off of content. We have to stay content neutral. This applies to all of our services that we provide, including meeting rooms, collections, and programs. We cannot restrict access based off of a government protected class, but we can set time, place, and manner restrictions. So what happens when libraries don't do that? So what is the impact to the community? What are we experiencing nationwide and statewide? So the first thing is libraries are getting sued, a lot of them, and it's their big lawsuits. The ACLU around 4 or 5 different states are suing. Penn America is joining in, United for Libraries is joining in, and they're losing in many of the states. There was a judgment that came out just last week in Arkansas. So ultimately this costs money, a lot of money, and we want to make sure that we don't get sued. So as complicated and uncomfortable it could feel, should this come our way, it's so important for us to continue the fight, stand up for the First Amendment rights, because the very last thing we want to do is get sued, and we would lose. Again, not legal advice, but
Yeah.
so what is happening? The number of censorship attempts. So the first thing that we track are the number of incidents. So this is, by the way, nationwide, right, that we're looking at right now. This comes out of ALA and United for Libraries. The number of incidents last year was a little over 1,200. Out of those 1,200, there were 4,200 unique titles. So when I said they're challenging in mass, that number tells you exactly, if it were 1 for 1, it'd be 1,200 and 1,200. Out of those unique titles, the number of challenge titles total was up to 9,000, which means it's the same titles over and over and over again that are getting those challenges. And so what are those titles? Oh, and then this is just a graphic seeing the rise. And there's no end in sight. This is continuing exponentially year after year. And that's not, Oregon is not unique. So I wanna call out, these are the Oregon specific statistics, and you see the mass increase of the green are the items and the yellow are the number of challenges. So both the number of challenges are going up, but again, saying those challenges are happening in mass in large lists, that green spike is showing you the number of items, which is why we have that number restriction on our policy now. And the types of materials that are getting challenged are almost all about those protected classes. So that's part of why we have the anti-discrimination statement in our policy. Looking at, and again, this is directly from Oregon, 66% of the challenges last year were by or authors. They were by authors that are part of this protected class or stories that are about this protected class. So LGBTQ is 66% of the challenges that happened in Oregon last year. And I just am gonna call out a couple of the incidences just because it helps know where these are happening. And I hope you start to see that it's happening all over the entire state. So Helix is a charter school in the eastern part of the state, very, very tiny charter school. 18 books were challenged at one time. Almost all of them were restricted, and at least one of them was, 11 of them have been removed. So, sorry, 11 of them have been restricted, and one of them was removed. So removals are happening. I think people often think, well, it's not happening in Oregon, and yeah, no, books are absolutely leaving the shelves in Oregon. And this is an example of LGBTQ specific concerns that have happened. And from ALA, our top 10 challenge books, they are all, as you can see, or if you're familiar about these titles, they are all LGBTQ or race-related titles. So again, those protected class and that anti-discrimination is deeply important for protecting these stories. Interestingly, and the reason why we ask on our forum for individuals to describe their concern and to share words about what their concern is because we want to know if it's a discriminatory concern. It is important for us to know if we need to go down this anti-discrimination road or continue down the assessment of our policy. Most of the time, people are not gonna say that they are discriminating, right? They're not gonna come out and say, I don't like this book because it has gay characters. That's rare. So you'll see things like, well, it's unsuited for the age group or unknown. From time to time, they will actually call out LGBTQ or race, and then we kind of go down another road, but mostly they're using different words to describe, knowing that it's all the same titles, right? The themes haven't changed. It's how you're describing your concern that changes. There's a misconception that challenges are only happening in schools, and we are neck and neck. Public libraries are getting just as many challenges as our schools. And actually, my belief is that the challenges are about control, right? They want to control the information and the narrative that our community is getting. So when they succeed at a school, they're gonna come to the public library next. So I actually imagine that public libraries are gonna get more of this deluge as these numbers continue to ramp up. There's also a misconception that's only happening in rural communities, and I wanna call out rural is 20, the number of incidences with 20, but if you add urban and urban rural, we're at 20. So it's about half and half, I would say, between urban and rural as to where these challenges are occurring. I just wanted to call out another example, again, materials getting removed. Napa removed Flamer, which again was one of the top 10 most challenged books, both in Oregon last year, but also ALA, and Napa is in the Willamette Valley. So again, all over the state. This one's a school specific removal. And the heat map that I showed you guys last week or last month, there's this feeling like blue states are not getting challenges, and you can see the entire West Coast is pretty deeply red with the number of challenges. It's not like you're protected in any one community because you happen to fall in any one demographic. And I think that's the point that I want to resonate is I think there could be a feeling of, oh, I'm in Deschutes, so it's not gonna happen. And I very much want you to know that even Deschutes, these conversations are happening here as well. And the most concerning is that the people that are challenging concerns, so are putting forward challenges. There's a misconception that it's only a parent or guardian that is putting forward a challenge. And we are seeing more and more and more that it's administrators and elected officials and members of the community that don't even, like people that don't even have library cards are coming forward and putting forward challenges, which again is why we require it to have, if you're gonna challenge our materials, you have to at least have a library card. But the biggest one is those administrators and elected officials are showing their power and their strength and are putting forward those challenges more and more often. And examples of that, Seaside City Councilor worked diligently to try and remove materials in Seaside. This is a public library. This was just last year, and that city councilor was so persistent with his request that their community actually went forward with a recall. And that city councilor was actually recalled from their position because of their putting forward of removal of library materials. And then Grants Pass, as you all know, hot off the presses today, I put this on here. This was the library that had the opt-out, so where they were trying to control library materials by a variety of different tactics, and they ultimately said, well, you can opt out of paying for district taxes. Well, that went out to the courts, and the courts denied that, and they clarified the law, and we're safe now, at least for now. But as of today, that the county commissioners have said, well, that's fine, but since you're a community library, you don't get to be in our buildings, and they are evicting them. They have 30 days to vacate the Grants Pass Library. And lastly, it's not just books. And I want to call out the importance of graphic novels. So you'll see that, 30 of the challenges last year were on graphic novels, and people seem to feel like graphic novels are somehow different because they're illustrative works. And I want to say that graphic novels, courts have held they are not different. They have the same requirements of First Amendment as anything else, and they actually do fall under an anti-discrimination umbrella because they help aid reluctant readers. So people that are maybe neurodivergent often gravitate to graphic novels because it helps word image relations and understanding of that material. So yes, the images make something a bit more poignant, but they are just as protected as a book under the court of law. So wrapping it up, intellectual freedom relates to more than the books. It's everything that we are. It's access to the building. It's our internet filtering, programs, meeting rooms, social media, bulletin boards, you name it. Any one of those only are allowed to have time, place, or manner restrictions. If you need more information, the Intellectual Freedom Committee has an awesome toolkit that we've helped with. And we have an entire website where you can hear me talk on YouTube for another hour if you're ready. And so I am ready to open it up for questions. What questions do you all have? Yeah.
With social media, and of course we're hearing a lot about Meta and Facebook and what they're doing. How is that changing? How are you dealing with it?
Can you define your question a little bit more?
Well, and I guess social media wouldn't necessarily be in the library, so how do you, but does ALA or anyone in that venue address what's going on in social media and how that is open or challenged or?
Not really, I mean, yes and no. So the first thing is courts have held repeatedly that the social media platforms are private corporations. And so they don't fall under this at all. A private corporation is allowed to sell or not sell anything that they want. And so until the government decides that a social media platform is a limited public forum in some way, and now falls under a government umbrella, they can do whatever they want. And that's why, you know, they can restrict different sorts of information, they can allow different sorts of information. So really, I mean, they're the wild, wild west, and they can do whatever they want. So I think our role as libraries is to share that with the public and to say, like, don't take social media as gospel because they can put anything they want out there, which makes sense to us, but isn't maybe as obvious to like our, you know, younger users. What does apply for us is that we are a government agency, and if we have a social media presence, which we do, our voice on that presence is an extension of that limited public forum. Which means that when we post something, if there ends up being a dialogue, whether it's critical or aggressive or uncomfortable in some way, we can't restrict the speech of the dialogue that happens on those posts. Unless that dialogue is violating one of our patron code of conducts as part of our manner restrictions. So that's where we have to be so close and so careful with all of our policies, because they have to be objective, but they are also part of how we protect ourselves. But overall, you can't restrict speech on a social media platform as a government agency. So if like the FBI had a Facebook presence, they would be considered a public forum, and they would have to allow the dialogue to happen there. Yeah.
Do we have, filtering on the children's computers? How does that fit into this conversation?
Yeah, so internet filtering is complicated. So the first thing is you have to allow computers that don't have filters. So you should allow for computers with filtering if a parent tells us that their child has to have a filtered account. So they have to ask for it to be filtered, and then we have a little field in the patron record that sets their login to filtered or unfiltered. And did I get that right, Lynn? Because I don't do that much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do have that, but there's also an additional protection to that, if for that, sometimes it'll look at also at the birth date field, and will automatically filter if somehow it got misinterpreted, or it got entered into the patron record too.
So then, without parental request, the filtering takes place?
I think it does based on the birth date too.
Does it?
I think it does.
Yeah.
On the unfiltered ones only.
Mm.
But I can double check that.
Yeah, we have to look at that, I'm not sure.
So
Yeah.
how is that different? How does that get different? How does that have like a different way of handling information?
Technically it doesn't, which is why I think we need to look at it, is that technically if children should have, unless a parent has asked for a filtered account, the child should have free and open access to the internet. Which I think is why we have the fixed field, but we'll have to look at how our thing is set up.
But children do have free access for the books.
They do, yep,
can't be filtered.
correct. Yeah, a child can check out any item in the library. The only person that can say whether or not that child can check out that item is their immediate legal guardian. So they would have to set some sort of parameters within their own household on library use and practices.
And how does Deschutes County, the numbers of requests compared to other places?
I mean, I would like to say that we're doing really good. We, you know, I think everyone's, I know, knock on wood, sorry, Todd. Prior to the like mass uptick that happened in 2020 and beyond, it was not abnormal for us to receive like 3 or 4 requests for reconsideration year, that was pretty normal for us. Since over the last 2 or 3 years, I'm hoping through the community outreach I've done and the education I've done, we've actually gotten less. So we've gotten like 1 or 2, some years we've actually had 0. So I feel like people are understanding the importance of intellectual freedom in our direct community and are showing that through their actions with us. But that doesn't mean that somebody out there won't jump on it, right? Like, just because I said this, I guarantee you tomorrow we're gonna get one, sorry, Ty. Yeah.
What kind of, and this is probably in the big folder that you gave me when I first got on the board, and I can't remember the answer to this, but what kind of processes or protections are in place when books are being cleaned out, or like they're old, somebody has decided
yeah.
the book is old and so pulls it, I don't know exactly what the right term is for
That's
that.
okay, I understand. So the term we use in library land is weeded. So we do consistently and regularly weed our collection. Our collection development policy has specific criteria that we use both for the addition of materials and the removal of materials. So we should always be following the objective criteria in our collection development policy. So among the things in our collection development policy is like its condition, or its age, or its interest to the community. And so what we do when we weed things is we look at the publication date, or is it in good physical repair, or has it never circulated? Is it clearly not of interest into the community? So we're really using objective data to make the decisions as to why we would get rid of something entirely or buy an additional copy. We are a popular lending library, so that publication date is an important one for us, where unless it is very actively still being used, it will get weeded due to like the date of it. And so that comes up, I would say that's probably one of the most consistent question mark is like, how come you don't have this book that was published 15 years ago? And it's because we are considered a popular lending library and we will opt to get like interlibrary loan for that. So we should never be denying the information need, even if it doesn't fit our collection development policy. We should find different ways to help them get that information, which is often turning to ILL or other resource sharing.
And is there any, like, is there like a layer of review that happens with that list of weeded books? Is it like happening on a monthly basis, or like it once a year? I don't know.
Yeah.
But does somebody that's, like a protection of sorts for the person who's weeding, is there another level of review to say, yep, those are the correct books to be weeding?
Not necessarily. So the only 3 people that are allowed to weed materials are our collection development librarians, and they are all masters, MLS holders, Masters of Library Science holders that have been trained specifically for this. So I feel like I want to honor their education and experience, that they are doing the job that we've trained them to do. That said, at any time, if somebody is wanting a material that has been weeded, if they put in a purchase suggestion, then it may make its way back on the shelves or again in ILL. There are times that we are doing a second review. So the only time that a collection development librarian is purposefully removing the material is through this withdrawal process. But materials do leave our shelves for other reasons, right? If somebody damages it or loses it or purposely doesn't bring it back, or we just can't find it. And so I run monthly lists of all the other ways that materials happen to leave our collection, and the collection development librarians review that and will repurchase. So another tactic that we see with censorship is people will hide books in the shelves, throw them away, or purposely check them out and never bring them back. And we have a process in place to catch those monthly and rebuy them should somebody choose to try one of those tactics.
Can you address the cost that these challenges have had for libraries? Has anybody done any analysis on average cost per challenge or?
Well, I know the ALA is definitely working on getting like a true statistic. I will tell you that for the lawsuits that have been lost, it's in the many thousands. So I think there was one in Lano that ended not that long ago, and I wanna say it was close to $76,000 that the library had to pay. To like just damages to the individual that sued. I would say indirectly, the amount of time that you have to go into looking at a review is massive, which is part of our legal protections on setting the manner restriction and the time restriction on the number of challenges we will accept. Somebody could, I guess, say like, I have a right to challenge as many items as we want, but we have a right to be fiscally responsible with your funds and actually are required to do that. And so we can set, judicial like constraints on the amount of time that we will put forward on addressing challenges. But no, I don't have an exact dollar amount, but I know as soon as I have it, I'll let you know, because ALA is working on it.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like, it can be, you think about some of these smaller.
Oh, it can be detrimental, like.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you had a staff of 3 and you got a bunch of challenges and the entire staff time was taken up. And I believe that happened in Canby where it was
Yeah.
just overwhelming to staff to deal
It
with
was
these.
absolutely overwhelming, yeah. Canby School District got 36 challenges on one form at the end of the school year. And I believe 8 of them ended up with restrictions and 1 was removed. Anything else?
And does Oregon track pretty well? Well, it's not the right word.
Yeah.
Equally as bad as what's going on in the nation? I mean, are the things we're seeing nationally pretty much playing out in our state?
Very much, yeah. I would say that we are experiencing everything that we're showing nationally as far as the increase in the number of challenges, the increase in the number of incidents, presence of the organizations that are putting this forward. The types of materials are all the same. Yeah, it's identical what is happening in Oregon and the rest of the country. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a great, well, I mean, Emily's pointed out a bunch of resources on ALA's site, but there's a number of organizations that are working actively in this, and
Yeah.
there are so many resources online about this, including the toolkit that Emily and OLA put together, which is just excellent.
Yeah.
So if you want to do more reading on it, there's a ton of information. People have really done some great work on this.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you do.
Yeah. You're welcome. It's, like I said, it's my passion, and I think it's one of the most important things that we provide as a library, so.
You know, I wanted to tell you from your last presentation last month about the browsing.
Oh, the browsing collection, yeah.
Yeah, and I saw all the graphics and the shelving that was not straight. And it's hard to know, but when we went to visit the Redmond Library, I saw it firsthand. And it was an epiphany.
Did it make sense? Good.
Wow, yes, this does work better.
It makes you wanna wander around and look, right? Like, immediately
Yes.
you're like, wait, how long do we have here?
Exactly.
I know, I can't wait to get a chance to like fully browse myself. I've been so busy setting it up that I'll see books and I'll be like, oh, I gotta grab that, and I'm like, it works.
Yeah, no, it's
works.
stunning to see it in a facility that was designed to accommodate it, because you see how effective it is.
Yeah.
And it's, seeing it in person, it really, brings it to life.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
so it's
I'm
great
so glad
job.
to hear that.
Yeah.
Awesome, well, if you at any point have any intellectual freedom questions, you know where to find me, because like I said, it's probably my favorite thing to talk about, and I might not immediately know the answer, but I have some connections, so I can help find it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right. Okay, so I guess, are we gonna continue with Greg's report now?
Sure.
And,
Yes.
why don't you go Greg, and then we'll jump back up to the.
Absolutely. So this past month, kind of slow with the holidays and everything, so not a lot of change. Probably saw that in the report, you know, the different sections of what's going on out there with the overall schedule. Doing a review of our master development schedule right now. We've made a couple little tweaks on what we're doing with downtown Bend, really through the plan check process and how we're going to establish the GMP and commence some early buyouts and awards. And so we really worked through with the contractor, Kirby, and as well as the design team to come up with that plan. I think the other thing that we're working on right now, and you'll see in the coming months, is we're doing a real reassessment of the central library. And, you know, as we're getting finished and getting ready to open Redmond, we've really learned more about how things are working well or not working as we load the building and get staff into the building, and how operationally it's getting set up and getting ready. So, you know, the last time we really updated Central was almost a year ago of what is our strategy around how we're going to, after the contractor's done, prepare the building to open. And it's a big building with a lot of activities in there. Besides the library component, there's an enormous administrative function right there, all the staff that's moving in there. And so we broke the building up into pieces of doing multiple activities at one time. The other is, how does that play into transferring all the people, whether it's from this building, admin, or from downtown Bend? A lot of collection in downtown Bend has to move over there. And I think we have a lot more experience now on how that collection gets moved and reshelved, and what happens to it in that. There's a period of time, as you see, like right now, Redmond, the libraries are closed. And we're gonna experience that same thing, you know, a little over a year from now, when we've got to close downtown and get all of those people, all of that collection, all of the furniture that gets reused there's a certain extent of that is moving, where we have to transfer that. So we're gonna take a deep dive in our schedule and what our strategy is, what our plan is. And part of it is to rethink it and confirm what we planned is accurate and that we still want to do it, but also inform all of our vendors. And so we're writing contracts and stuff for people like our shelving guy and collections and Tech, who's all of our RFID equipment, as well as the group that helps with collections. When do we need them? What is their timelines? And how are they going to fit into this? So that's really playing out right now as an activity that's ongoing and will continue. My goal is to probably republish our master schedule in late February, early March, somewhere in that time frame, based on just how well that goes. It's something that you kind of want to push, but you don't want to like rush a decision. You want to make sure it's well thought out. So from a schedule, there's no changes in dates, but that's what's going on out there. You know, the construction schedule activity is on Central Library. And so that's actively moving along. Lots of change out there constantly. Every week that we go out there, we see new things and a lot of activity. And we had a long discussion today in our OAC meeting about, okay, it's the beginning of the new year. We got 11 months to the end of construction. How does the contractor feel? And they were really good about opening up of what they're worried about, what they're not worried about, what they foresee, what they're thinking about. And you know, you always like to prod them and challenge them a bit. And they're really good about communicating with us and talking about it. Sometimes they talk about something that's maybe a struggle, and it's like, well, okay, maybe we can help with that. And so the process is, I think, working well. in that level of communication amongst the whole team to make sure we're thinking about our actions now, how do they affect us down the road? And is there anything that we should be planning and doing today? So I felt good about that coming out of the discussion, that the group was working very well, very cohesively together and engaging in that. You know, we always talk about lessons learned. In the last couple of days, we've had a lot of discussion about that, of really making sure that little things that we run into on Redmond, how do they get taken over to Central? How do they get planned for downtown? So that again, we're constantly learning and making sure that we're not fighting the same battles twice, and hopefully just keep improving. So from a schedule standpoint. On the budget, there's no changes to the overall budget. As you saw, that really stayed very static at this point. One, just, not that we don't look at it, because I look at it constantly, but there just really wasn't anything that was changing. Things are running fairly smooth and moving right along. I try to do a really deep dive throughout the year a couple times and make budget adjustments at certain time periods. And so this next couple months, as we come out of closing the books on 24, I do an updated cash flow because we want that for business planning reasons, as well as us looking ahead. And just really re-looking at the budget. And as we kind of bring some things to closure, Redmond being the big one, as well as the branches, what dollars are in those project budgets and what do we need to do with them? Are they still sitting there in those budgets? Do they get transferred into contingencies or whatnot? With Central, it's about purchasing, just finishing up any contracting that we've got going on. Most of that is done, so there's not a lot of change in there. Downtown Bend will be a little bit active this year with setting the GMP. That's the next big piece, and that's another $16 million or so dollars. That's a big number that we'll be dealing with here in the first half of this year to do that. So from a budget standpoint, overall, it still looks really sound, really good. Contingencies are very sound for the position that we're at in the program. Overall, I feel like our level of contingency is very substantial and high. So, which makes me feel good that we have a low risk of any real big problems coming up that we couldn't deal with. So from that standpoint, just thinking about going on through with the other stuff, the procurement and contracts, we'll have to talk about the early learning for Central tonight. I wrote up a summary on that, and so that's one that we are bringing to we've done parts and pieces over the last 6 months with some stuff that we released on it, and we're bringing that to a final award. Nothing with insurance, that's all gone well, making sure everybody's signed up and policies are in place, and that continues along. So it's the one that you want to never really have to talk about. And so it's good that that's maintaining. We have, from a design and construction standpoint, on Central Library, we're actually there's very little design active work. We're doing some final reviews of our furniture. We've got final specifications and books, and it's these giant 3-ring binders that are about 6 inches tall, and there's 3 of them. So lots of parts and pieces, and so the team is going through, back checking everything that we are looking at purchasing, making sure it's still what we want. And again, some of the new furniture that just went into Redmond, how does that play into what we're doing? Are we still satisfied with it? Is it performing well? Looking at quantities, as you start to put furniture and stuff into the building and start moving it around with all the shelving and all that, it's like, okay, do we have too much? Do we need a little bit more? How does that work out? I think that is a continuous learning thing for a year or two as you live in the buildings. that the district will be refining their needs. But there's some good experience already with that. So that's kind of wrapping up. Like I said, we're wrapping up most of the contracting aspects of it. There's not a lot there. Production wise, contractors moving right along with their building. They've pretty much got all of their contracting completed. They're going through material procurement. That's always a big one that we talk about, is how is that going? And are they getting their materials? Is there any concerns there, anything that's, not available to us? Right now, it's looking really good, very promising. No surprises that are popping up that the team can't deal with. You have issues all the time. The FF&E side is, with our early learning, we're well into the technical design and the prototyping that we released Figure Plant on this past fall, and also going into the production. So one of the things that we've done with, we're gonna go through the award of their contract. Well, we've also been going through a production schedule with them of what is the sequence, how they're gonna build all their parts and pieces, because we need them to build all of these custom pieces and have them sitting ready to show up one day. And one day was January, of next year. And so they have it's a good challenge for them. How do they organize that? And so we've really been working with them for them to create a good work plan, shows how they're gonna execute it, how we're gonna fund it as we go along, to have a good sound assurance, one that we're confident in, that they can be there ready for us. And that's the same with our shelving guy and our furniture people, because they all have very set time frames. And it goes back to that schedule of how do we put all this stuff into the building in that block of time. And these vendors really have to be set up, ready to go, because they're given a limited amount of time, and they have to get, certain ones, it's like, you gotta get first floor, this side of the building done here, then you gotta be here, boom. So it's a lot of work happening around that aspect of getting those vendors prepped and prepared, and which ties back into our schedule evaluation with them. So that's going on Central, on Downtown Bend. Plans are being submitted into plan check tomorrow. And, or actually they went in today, excuse me. And so they're going into plan check. They'll be in there for the first about 2.5 months or so, just depending on how quick the city is at turning them around. Kirby is working through doing really final preparations in order to be ready to put plans out for pricing. And that'll happen after we get the first round of plan check comments back from the city. Then we'll incorporate them into the plans and create a second submittal set for plan check, but also our bid set that we're going to use to go to contract and set the GMP. And so for Downtown Bend, different than what we did on Redmond and Central, where we did multiple amendments, on those we did 3 and 4 amendments. Here we're going to do 1 GMP, and we'll end up coming back to you. At least that's our current strategy. I should say, it's always subject to change. But that's the plan there. So the team's really doing a lot of work with a big renovation project like this. You can see going from the smaller branches that were 8,000 square feet to already, 5 times the size, almost 40,000 square feet over here. Much more complex building. And so Kirby's doing a lot of prep work to set up for tours. They're doing some, they're videotaping what the condition of the building is, and it's above the ceilings and stuff. And it just gathers more information that they're going to give to the subs to help educate them on what's the condition of the building. You got the plans of what we want to build. The more information they have, the more accurate their pricing is going to be, better preparation there is. One of the things we've always told them is that, look, when we close Downtown Bend, we want to be able to go as fast as possible and reopen it. It's the last project. It's when everybody's getting burnt out and tired of this program, right? We're gonna be in about year 5 or 6 at that point. But to finish it, and we have a lot of time this whole year for prep work. And so they're gonna be doing that. We're gonna be purchasing a lot of stuff starting this summer that won't go in for a year later, but ideally it is built, manufactured, shipped, and sitting in warehouses, ready to go in. So as fast as we can take it out, we can start putting it right back together and get back to where we can reopen in the timeline that we planned for. So we've got a couple little things coming up with the final 100% design on our early learning for downtown Bend and our final furniture books for downtown Bend. They all come out this month. So the design team is working on getting them wrapped up and completed. And so that really kind of finishes all of our planned design work. You know, after, call it the next couple months, we won't have a lot of design activity going on. The design team will be doing construction administration and support and that, and continue all the way through the end of the project. But we'll be done with a really major phase, you know, that started back in 21. So a lot of work has transpired from there. So that's kind of everything that's been going on projects. Questions of anything? I think kind of hit the highlights of it. So
Any questions for me?
I drove by in Central the other day and there were a lot more of the outside paintings. It's really starting to look like paintings.
So they will finish all those panels on the main building throughout this week and maybe a little into the next week. And then they have a few that go up on the penthouse that are going up next week and they'll be done.
Looks nice.
Yeah. You know, they chose to, you know, make those off-site. And it cost a little bit more to build them in the plant. But the speed, as you've seen, they've gone up just incredibly fast. And so it was truly beneficial. It's helped and to get that up and to help start closing in the building, you know, from the elements as we're working through the winter.
Where are the construction materials being sourced from
I would say,
generally?
yeah, I would say there a large majority are here in the Northwest. Wouldn't say just Oregon, there's quite a bit from Oregon, but you know, like our lumber, which is a large component of the building, is coming out of Oregon and Washington and Canada. We have a good chunk that comes out of Canada because Canada supplies most of our construction lumber. Very high percentage from the Northwest. We have some things that come from beyond, but I don't have the exact percentages, but it's always a good one to know. You know?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And if I'm remembering correctly, for LEED certification, one of the elements that we get credits for is sourcing, you know, a certain percentage. And they basically want the majority of your materials to be sourced within a particular radius.
Yeah. Yeah, 500 miles.
Okay.
You get bonus points for everything you do.
Yeah, and they don't grade on a curve for coastal states either.
Yeah, exactly.
And then this might be a question for Todd, but what's the plan, if everything goes as planned? What is the plan or the options available with the contingency that would be left over?
Well, based on the bond language, we can't add new projects. So basically, we'd probably look and see, is there anything we missed in any of the buildings that we might want to add? Other than that, it would go back towards paying off the bond.
And I had a question about how much flexibility do we have? 'Cause I was just struck, you know, we went and looked at Redmond, which is just an incredible. But the staff, who's done an incredible job of all these different components that are, I think the public is just gonna go wild over, frankly. But, you know, to see when people actually get into that building, and even in the smaller branches as well, you know, like you have your idea of how the building will be used, then you have experience with how the building actually is used, what works, what doesn't. So, or what's like, sometimes you might have something that is kind of almost an afterthought that ends up being wildly popular, that, oh, well, we should have done more of that.
Yeah.
So how much play do we have as we go forward with Central? I know we're looking at construction lessons learned, but how much can we incorporate usage lessons learned?
I think that we do a fair amount of that, the usage on the shelving systems.
Mm-hmm,
We did, you know, at one point last July, we came and said, okay, we're ready to award. But then we came back in November because we realized we went in and implement a number of changes based on the lessons learned. And it was, there were some sizable changes because there we changed a lot more of the shelving to mobile shelving.
mm-hmm,
And increased our quantity on that and tweaked on some of those conditions of the angled shelving and the display.
mm-hmm,
So, no, I think we're looking at that as much as possible
mm-hmm,
and continue to make those changes. Where we have like restrictions, I think generally we have funding availability to do that because we've got our contingencies and we have good healthy budgets. Availability of materials and time have impacts on that. So sometimes it's like, okay, can we make the change without impacting operations or the completion of the facility?
right,
Or can we do it afterwards? So even like at Sun River, we got in there and realized, wow, the staff room is just really noisy.
mm-hmm,
And so we're going back in with additional acoustical treatments. We went back in and made some changes on the control systems there. And that one was one where in the beginning we thought, we can use the old stuff and it'll work okay. And it really didn't work okay.
mm-hmm,
So we're doing those. The furniture, we're really looking at that, of quantity and somewhat of type.
mm-hmm,
We spent a lot of time looking at how are we powering our furniture? So a lot of it's powered.
mm-hmm,
And what are the best ways and best practices to power that furniture? And so it's having, we're implementing a lot of change on Central right now for that purpose alone.
mm-hmm,
So no, I think we can do a fair amount in process
right,
as much as we can. Now, there's certain times where I get all nervous and it's like, we gotta go.
right,
And keep the work moving forwards. But I think we look at that and trying to have an open mind of, if we have a thought, let's consider it. We
mm-hmm,
may say, no, we ran out of time to do that. But it's an active process that's going on right now.
mm-hmm,
Because I think our goal has always been to deliver the best product for the district for the long term.
right,
And sometimes it may mean, okay, we're gonna sacrifice something now, time or money, to implement a change.
right,
And so we have weighed that, you know, I don't think we let it hold us back if it's like in the best interest of the district.
right, right. Well, thank you,
Yeah.
it's good to know, because it's just like, I'll be fascinated
Yeah.
to see the Redmond Public's reaction to this new building, because I think they're just gonna go crazy. But to see how they inhabit that space and how they make use of all of
Yeah.
those different areas, because there's so much variety, and to see where people end up congregating and, it's just gonna be really interesting.
It is, I think in 6 months after opening, 9 months after opening,
Mhm.
we're gonna be talking about things that are happening in Redmond. And what does that mean for Central? What does that mean for downtown Bend?
Right,
Sometimes it doesn't mean we can do something to go help back into the smaller branches. Because
right,
they got done first, and maybe we have some new ideas, on something.
right.
Don't always know what something is today.
Right, well, it's, yeah, because I think Redmond is gonna inform Central and downtown a lot.
Yeah.
I think because of the scale is so much different.
I think, and back to your question about those funds availability, I think that's one of the things that the district is gonna have the ability. Because right now, if we continue as we trend, there's gonna be funds left there that haven't been spent or committed. And when we find something that is a benefit to make a change, the district's gonna have the finances to do it and the authorization to do it. Because that's generally within the bond program and saying, just because we finished and reopened the library, it doesn't say that we can't still continue to enhance or remodel it or, upgrade those facilities. And I think with the branches, we've talked about a few things that are kind of being monitored. Should we make a change on operable walls on a couple of them, come to mind that, and those are things that could be decided 6 months or a year or two from now.
Mhm.
Because there's no time on the bond either. Is that once I don't think there's a limit that says, here's when it expires.
That was my question. Are we limited by time on when our contingencies need to be addressed, either put back into the bond or spent?
There's probably somewhere out there, but I haven't seen a specific date.
Okay,
The bond language would be the first place our bond council would tell us to
Okay.
look,
And
so
it's 20 years that the bond, that we're,
certainly the repayment on the bond
Repayment on the
issue.
bond, yeah.
But in terms of, use of funds and a time limit, from my recollection, the bond language didn't say that this project will be done by X date.
okay.
So it does come down to the finer point of like how you define what that scope is. And again, then you go back to the bond language and it really is anchored on upgrade, modernization, and a third term that got used throughout the bond language about what we're doing across the district.
When we first started, we had there was a timeline about within 5 years, we had to expend a certain percentage, it's like
Right.
85%. That had to be committed through contracts and expenditures. And, with the change from Roble to Stevens Ranch site, that pushed us out and actually caused us to go beyond it, but there's the force majeure clause of, it was something beyond the library's control, so it's like excusable and as an extension of time there. But that was one where you had to go expend a certain amount within the time, but I never really saw where it said, hey, here's your end date.
Well,
That I know
We've experienced that because we weren't able to expend that during that time, we start getting penalized by the IRS.
That's correct.
Right.
Which we've talked about, that, in other words, they will collect money on interest that we're earning off of that. And it makes sense because they had to do that because there were governments that went out for a bond and then invested it and sat on it for 20 years. And
Yeah,
Right,
this
that's
is
not the
they're not-
intent.
yes.
right, this is a construction bond, it's not an endowment fund, right?
So,
Right,
so the best way to think of it is really what we're targeting is the end of the final project, which is the downtown Bend Library. And by that point, we should be looking at wrapping up
Yeah.
everything at that point.
Right, and we wanna, obviously, we don't wanna spend money frivolously at all. I mean, if we wanna complete the projects in a good, and deliver good quality to the
Right.
district, but if we have money left over to reduce the bond, that's great.
Yeah.
And this administration building is not included?
It is not part of the scope.
And so that'll be a future decision on what happens here. And I assume that this parking lot will be the staging area when work on downtown is being done.
Yeah. We'll probably even utilize, like, this room will become our construction meeting room.
Yeah, so that we don't have to use parking lot space for a
The
trailer.
trailer, right, I was
Yeah,
gonna
that can
say,
be
when you
material
look at
staging.
all
Yeah.
the scope of what's going on at Central,
Yeah.
yes.
And you look at that point, we pretty much moved everybody out of here to populate Central.
Right,
The construction team, not only conference room, but they can utilize some of the offices. And therefore, use the parking lot for cars and equipment and not.
well,
trailers.
and I mean, I look at all the material storage that is taking place over there, and the one question I have about how this is all gonna roll out is, so you say we're moving books and the items that we will reuse over to Central,
Right.
but, so does that mean downtown is closed and Central is closed simultaneous, like
Yes.
what we've had to do in
Right.
Redmond? So there will be no library spaces over
Yeah,
during that
There's
time
gonna
period.
be a portion of time there, and that's one of the things that we talked about. Really looking at how is that gonna happen, how's that transpire?
Right,
Because there's just that point in time where you can, and I think we've done it in the past where books started moving instead of being returned to the
Right.
location. They start, and you start dwindling down the collection, but it's a very large collection.
I was gonna say, is it all moving?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's
Yeah. So
huge.
and so it's not something that can be done in a week.
Right,
Yeah, for comparison, the movement of Redmond's material that was in the former library and then came back into the new library, that material plus the additional material that went on the shelves, that was a month's worth of all tech services plus additional staff getting books and getting them on the shelves.
yeah,
And so, it's that same volume plus all of the additional opening day collection at
that's
Central.
gonna be, yeah,
It'll be a
it's
good
gonna a bit.
opportunity for people to visit our other libraries.
Yes.
That's right.
From the libraries here.
Here,
Yes.
here.
yeah.
So,
Well, I think people are gonna, I imagine that there are gonna be a lot of people that are gonna go down and take a look at Redmond.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
because it's worth looking at.
Hope they don't wait that long.
one other little piece that fits in there is that we close East Bend at the end of this year because the lease expires, and so
Right.
we'll be working with the district to figure out, okay, where are we gonna put that collection?
Right,
In December, in order to prepare it so it's ready to be transferred in to go on the bookshelves, which actually occurs more out in January, February, and, you know, I always think of it by floors, but the collection is by, what's in East Bend goes on every corner of the library there, whether it's on second floor, third floor,
right.
you know, because it has some of everything.
Moving books is
So-
incredibly complicated.
Oh, it is. Yeah. I just thought, oh, they just bunch of boxes and throw it on the shelf. It was
Yeah,
not
no.
anything like that.
Anybody that has ever been involved in moving a library knows that is not the case.
That's not even what happens when I move books, when I move my own stuff.
I know, it's-
Just throw it on the shelf.
It's the first panic point we see from the public when they move, is they come down to the library, how do I get rid of my books? So,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
we know what the feeling.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have
The early-
early learning fabricator.
Yep, so this is the final cost for the early learning on Central, so this is Figure Plant, who's our manufacturer fabricator there. Like I said before, we've given them some incremental adds initially for technical design work that they needed to do, and then for building prototypes, and then we released them on about 400,000 of fabrication back in October for components and pieces that we're making more of these items. They're not redesigning them, you know, it's, the landforms and certain things that didn't change, and so they could start into the production of that. And so this is the balance of everything else, and so we've gone through it all, it's within our budget. And so we're ready to release this, and they're gonna be moving straight into fabrication on this, and this will go throughout the year. The one thing I would say, I noted in here that the final cost was $2,069,000 there. As we have been going back through and double checking, getting ready to prepare change orders to actually do this, we found an error in their spreadsheet, and it's really a little bit higher. It's within the overall limit, so I'm not really changing the authorization level, but I will tell you the initial contract is gonna be like $2,096,000. It's almost like it transposed, but it was just one of the cells formulas wasn't adding up right. And so it's something that the team caught as they were going through, doing a back check, getting ready for creating the change order document. But this captures everything that we've got in our 100% drawings and in our plan. So I attached what they give to us, you know, as far as documentation or parts of it, just to give you a sense of the components and those pieces. I wasn't expecting you to look at all of it, but this is what we use to go through, and they give us all their assumptions in addition to their the drawings and plans that they're working from. So, and it's basically gives us an authorization level with a little bit of additional authorization level for changes that we, you know, anticipate and experience as we go through this. That try not to ask for an excessive amount above. Usually I had it at about 100,000, already used up, you know, about 30 of that. So, but it's not anything that I'm concerned about. That's kind of.
Is that, I mean, from 580,000 to 2,170,000, that's a big jump. Did you anticipate that beforehand? There's no surprises?
No. So our overall budget is sitting at about 2.2 million for this.
Okay.
The 500,000 was just a partial award of the entire. Because one of the things that we had them do the technical design and the prototyping early on. That was the first piece we gave them before finalizing the number. And that was really to let them work through some of the issues of how they were gonna build some components before we finalize the price of what it's gonna cost us. In the past, the technical design and the fabrication cost was all approved at once. Then as they worked through the technical design and they figured out, oh, this changed this, and then they had to come back and say, we've got a glitch, and have to ask for more funds. Because they underestimated or that, you know, if there was a legitimate reason for it to be an additive cost to their contract. But this, so that was an early award of a partial. Yeah, so relative to our budget, this fits right in line with our budget. And, you know, we brought them on, we selected them much like we did the CMGC as a vendor that came on board to work with this figure plant because all of these things were very custom oriented. They've been really pretty good about working within our budget and working with us when at times when we exceeded our budgets. We said, all right, we got to get back down to this, and let's figure out ways to get there. And, so they've been a good partner. I think that a lot of unique things and they've had to figure out to make it better, more durable. Most certainly on the durable side. So just give them a little kudos, and I think they've been a good working partner for us. So
I will say, after we got to tour Redmond, My kids played with that music making module for a long time and then went home and asked for an app to be able to continue building music at home. So that was really exciting to see that.
Oh, that is really neat.
Which was great over winter break to have. Really exciting to That was really happy to see.
Yeah. No, as I said, just touring and getting to see things concretely is really helpful, and you can tell how much planning and how much design work and how much fabrication skill it would take to make a lot of these things, so.
Well, if you think about what you see in Redmond, and there's a lot of really cool stuff there. And this is 4 times more.
Yeah.
That's going in. One, it's a bigger building, it has capacity, but I think it's gonna have a lot of great things too.
Yeah.
Another real stretch of multiple things for the kids to play with.
And adults.
And
adults.
Sure.
You know, to Anne's point earlier, this is a great example of a place where we saw what people really responded to in early learning in the Pine and Sisters.
Right.
That impacted what we did in Sun River, and then we learned from that, and that impacted designs at Redmond. And now, as we're getting closer to that and seeing what works and what doesn't in the design, we're feeding that all into everything that's following.
Yeah, yeah, because you just don't know until kids get in there and experience it, so. Yeah, it's been exciting to watch what kids do with that. I would entertain a motion, or unless people have more questions of Greg on this.
I move to provide the library director with signing authority up to $2,170,000 for the Central Library Early Learning Fabricator technical design, prototype services, component fabrication, and installation.
Do I hear a second? Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we're back up to the top of the agenda now to library facilities.
Yes. Thanks for your flexibility. I was telling Todd, I started moonlighting as a taxi driver for 2 very specific clients that need to be taken to all sorts of after-school activities. So here I am a little bit later than this meeting. Thank you for moving me towards a later spot.
Not a problem.
Okay, so January, this is, I think, a great time for us to do our annual asset protection update. It does turn into something of a year in review, and I think back to where we were at the beginning of January 2024. We had a couple of months in new Lapine and Sisters under our belt, and it was clear skies ahead. We were gonna just iron out a few of the wrinkles and no problem, and then I think 2 weeks after that board meeting, we had the pipe burst in Sisters. And we've also done a few other things, follow-on activities to make some changes to the HVAC controls. And, we're doing more than just ironing things out. We're taking some of those lessons learned and saying, hey, we've got a little bit more budget here. We want to tweak this, or we want to change that, or we need to learn a little bit more about this sophisticated building system. And so you'll see that kind of woven through this. How would you mind going to the next one? So this is just taking straight from the board policy for asset protection. So really this is Todd's report, and he has delegated down to me to report on how this policy pertains specific to some of our biggest assets, our buildings and our building facility, furniture, and equipment. Okay, so this is the vision for the business services department specific to facilities management. It is our goal to always maintain a safe and welcoming environment that's of appropriate size to meet the needs of our customers and staff. That is somewhat nebulously defined. Appropriate depends on the customers and the population and the changing needs over time, and as demographics change and new families move in. So it is a thing that we're constantly monitoring and asking ourselves today, are our facilities safe and welcoming and of appropriate size to meet the needs of our customers and staff? before we move on, I'll point out just a couple of the pictures there.
Sorry.
Oh.
Why not?
I did that,
So that the one on the left is a look of Redmond up on the second floor as we've started to populate those shelves with collections. So that we're really looking forward to seeing how that becomes a welcoming environment. And certainly it's waiting for our customers and they're waiting to come on in. And on the right-hand side, you can see in this last year, we did have our grand opening event for Sun River Library. And it's after its renovation. So that's a little drone eye view of that one. Okay, so this is a bit of an eye chart. This is kind of the one slide that summarizes how are we actually approaching and implementing that vision in our library buildings and with our furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So we have a system in place to receive action requests and observations from people throughout the district. Staff members can put that into the system and let us know in real time if there's something that's not working quite right. We also bring vendors in on regular visits for preventative maintenance, and then we schedule regular inspections of key elements in our facilities to make sure that we're maintaining the general upkeep and visual inspections on things to get ahead of major actions before they become more significant and more costly to the district. Those are that's kind of the biggest summary here. In terms of how we break that down, there's a few new things on this list as we've rolled out this brand new building in Redmond. So for the first time ever in the annual inspections list this next year, we'll be doing annual inspections of our solar panels up on the roof. We'll be doing annual inspections of the radiating systems. We'll be, looking at a lot of those new systems that are in place, specifically at Redmond, where the whole building is new, but every piece of equipment is something new, and there's so many new functions related to that. All right. Okay, so this really is that year in review. What were some of the things that we're really proud of that our buildings and our equipment supported in terms of district goals and meeting that vision? As I mentioned right at the top, we did have a pipe burst in January, but we managed to recover from that with the help of a lot of really great assistance from our vendors, from the general contractor on the renovation project. We're able to just step right back in and basically get it into a state that visually was indistinguishable from what we opened out to the public in October of the year prior. So you can see a little picture of the tear out of all that wet carpeting on the right-hand side. And again, just on reflection, thinking about how fortunate we were that the damage, though extensive, was limited to flooring, insulation, ceiling panels, and a little bit of wall material. No collections lost, no new shelving lost, or any of that great early learning equipment that was right in that corner, just to the right on in that photo. Another thing that we did that I already just mentioned, but to mention again, the opening of the remodeled Sun River Library is such a great achievement that really was our halfway mark in terms of 3 out of the 6 buildings in the district that were identified for this project to be completed. And just a really exciting thing to be able to bring that back to the community. The third thing on here is getting Redmond prepped. So it hasn't happened yet. That'll definitely go on next year's slide when we talk about the opening there. But we've gotten this building to a state where we can bring our staff in to train on those facilities, to learn how to use this new equipment, to develop new practices and processes that mesh with all of these new services that the district is going to be able to offer to that community. And then the last one is just a little note that, yes, it's more than just buildings. It is bringing the library to communities. So 2 years ago, the board approved a budget that included investing in outreach vehicles. In the last 12 months, we've logged over 35,000 miles of outreach activities in those vehicles to support strategic goals, going out to the community, supporting activities during the renovation projects, keeping operations going for communities where, say, we're running a trailer in Sun River, and we still want to do programming. So using those vans to go out to alternate sites to hold programs and events. Okay, so looking at next year, what are some challenges that we're looking ahead? Yes, so many new pieces of equipment, new systems in the building, new controls, new maintenance schedules, everything's new. Even the things in the renovated buildings are new, or they're new things messed with old things, which are complicated in their own way. So this is our year to really start to dig deep and learn how to take ownership of those systems back from the contractor who's put them in place. And, you know, we've exited the warranty period on 2 of the buildings in Lapine Sisters. This coming year, we'll be out of warranty on Sun River and headed toward warranty on Redmond. Then it really is ours. It's ours to maintain, just like we do all of our buildings. And so we need to know these systems inside and out, or know the right vendors so that we can pull on them and get them on the schedule to come on in and take a look at things. With Central Library, there are going to be, again, new services specific to that building, just like with Redmond and some of the new things there. Looking at window washing for a 3-story building, looking at the maintenance of a much larger piece of property and what that means. Looking at you know, several of the spaces in there that Redmond doesn't have, even though we offer those same services. So things like, what's the difference in terms of how we manage a facility for enclosed creative space? Is it different? Is it not, right? So learning that as we go and trying to figure out, are there other elements of that we need to do specific to that specific need in the building? As Greg mentioned, at the end of 2025, we will be looking at transferring East Bend Library operations over to Central Library, closing East Bend in its current location, not only moving collections, but relocation of staff and staff positions, and then figuring out how does that mesh with the opening schedule for and the training schedule for Central. And then finally, expansion of services while protecting district assets. This is a broad term. What do I mean by that? Well, we're expanding services. It's not just that we've got all these great spaces. We've got new equipment in the makerspace that people can check out. We've got new rooms with new capabilities and new kinds of functions, AV systems and things like that. We are looking at what after hours access for our rooms might look like, and trying to figure out how do we meet those customer desires for expansion of services while still being good stewards of district assets and making sure that we're doing what we can to protect those assets in the right way. So every one of those that I put on that list is not a challenge just for facilities management or my department. It's a challenge for us as a district, but I get to talk to you about it since it's responsibilities.
I want to highlight something because I watched this in the meeting today. Probably all of us have worked somewhere where you come in, like, this room is hot, this room is cold. And you go and you tell somebody, and they, for about 6 months, say, all right, you know, buy a sweater.
Yeah.
And so we've been trying to work through issues in Lapine and Sisters, and it was amazing. It shows the support of the board because you supported the system. Robert is talking with the construction people and the designers and pulling up charts showing, well, here, you said you did this here, and here's where the temperatures went, and here's what the fan looked like, and here, and showing diagrams, and just amazing. And you could see what I know what they would have said to you if you hadn't had that. They would have given you some answer that would have kept us quiet for another month. And so that's just a level of detail that we're able to have with these buildings, and really great that it's a system that we'll be able to do that with all of our buildings. Just kind of a microcosm of what we can do with these things.
And are you like plotting that information yourself or you're pulling it from? somewhere?
Yes, so one of the things that we did as an additional item to go back to Lapine and Sisters was when we started getting into construction planning for Redmond, we realized that the HVAC control system specified for Redmond was a lot more sophisticated, gave us a lot more information, and it was all online on this dashboard set up with a portal where you could pull all these different locations. And actually, they demoed it for us with Ben Lapine School District. So it's the system that they use to manage way more facilities than we do here. So we said, yes, please, we'd like that for Lapine and Sisters, even though those projects are done. And because we had unused contingency, we were able to go back and say, all right, we can still cover it under existing budget. Let's make it happen. Because we were able to do that, as we head into this winter, we've been having some issues with maintaining good, constant, comfortable temperatures. And as Todd mentioned, we're able to pull that data up and it's got it just has a lot of depth to it. So you can spend hours just pulling up trend logs and looking at each parameter and plotting each one and plotting them against each other over time. So yeah, so I actually, after that call, was able to do a plot where we had seen the temperature go really wild. It was very stable, and then all of a sudden, like 1 week, it went really wild. I was able to do a comparison plot with that, with some other mechanism in the system where it was actually just opening up the floodgates for outside air. It's like, guys, it's 20 degrees outside overnight. Why are we opening up outside air? But you can see side by side, wait a minute, there's your problem, because that's exactly where things were going haywire. And the tool that the district invested in for these buildings is what gave us that ability to have that insight.
Wow.
Just to give an example, like in the old Redmond Library about 20 years ago, we had an issue and it took 6 months for somebody to come and figure like, oh, your outside damper's open.
Yep. Yeah, and now it's just on a plot. It's like, oh, there it is.
This is not all in your mind.
Wow.
That's great.
Do you have any other questions about
I
it?
do, I still have people asking me, when are the rooms gonna be open for meetings at night?
Mhm.
And
Yeah, so I think that is something that we are actively looking at. That is that last bullet point on my parting slide. The key is trying to figure out how do we open that up in a way that is safe for the customers that reserve the rooms, but also takes good care of the equipment that's in there, not just the tables and chairs, but the projector and the little touchscreen AV and the heating and cooling, right? If they happen to leave the door open. So we're kind of trying to go slowly enough so that we understand how we're using those rooms during regular operating hours before we expand it to the time when we don't have any staff available to assist if something does go wrong.
And so are we projecting 6 months or what should I tell anybody?
Oh, man. I don't know if we have something
We
that.
don't really have anything, I would say, because the other thing, the buildings, of course, are a big thing. But there's also some software that we have to get to start talking to each other. In the past, we would hand out keys, people would have to come get them, sometimes they forget, we get a phone call, I can't get in. So what we're doing now, and the reason you see keypads on a lot of the doors, is that we want to get our software to speak with our reservation software. So that when a customer says, I want to be in the building at 6 AM for a morning meeting, they're like, great, here's your code to let yourself in. And we're not quite there yet. Yeah.
There's not one piece of software that allows both those things to
No,
happen.
it's like, so we have to get 3 different components to talk to each other, the reservation system, the door hardware, and what's the other piece?
I think those are the two
Is
big
it just
ones.
the 2 big ones? It seems like there's another one stuck in there somewhere. So we're working on that. I know that customers really, really want it, but, Redmond is such a big building, it's really taken a lot of brain power and bandwidth, so we've just kind of been waiting to see how this is gonna work. Before we kind of turn to that. I think we're still looking at doors and trying to solve solutions with our doors, so it's not quite ready for prime time. And I think to Robert's point, we don't want people to be unsafe in our buildings. We don't want our buildings left unlocked. Yeah, and Robert doesn't want to go there at midnight and go check a door because he got a phone call.
So I should tell them, It'll be a while.
Tell them it'll be a while,
It'll be a while,
that there's,
yeah.
it's actually more complicated than you might think at first.
Yeah.
And we have to do the work to make sure that it's going to work every time without fail.
But we haven't lost sight of it.
Okay.
It is not, it's
Still on the
still,
list.
it's
It's
still
on
there.
the list. Okay, well, thank you, Robert, and this leads into our asset protection monitoring report.
Yes, and again, I'm not gonna go through each point, just because really the part of it is what Robert just talked about, but I did address each point individually for you to do ahead of time, and so I will say my conclusion is that we are in compliance with the asset protection policy, and happy to answer any questions on this.
Anybody have any questions? If not, I would entertain a motion.
So I move that the library district is in compliance with the asset protection executive limitations policy.
A second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, well, I think we have some library news, do we not?
Yes, we do. Bunch actually. We did talk a little bit about Sun River, where we want to put in some acoustical treatment in the staff area. We are kind of working through the logistics of that because that may require some closure. Not totally sure yet. We're kind of working through that. We also have an issue with some of the wastewater pipes in one wastewater pipe in Sun River that just needs a slight fix, but it may interrupt services to one of the bathrooms for about a week or 1 to 3 weeks, probably 3 weeks.
I think it's 3 weeks, yeah.
So we're kind of looking at that and trying to figure out how can we do that with the least disruption, again, to the public. So we're looking at timelines for that.
This is one of those examples where you've got a new system married up to an old system.
Yes.
And in this case, like physically married up in a way where there's like a low point, and we need to level that out.
Friday, from 9:30 to 11, we're having a media day at the Redmond Library. You are all welcome to come to that. Basically, what we're doing is we've invited all the local press. We've also invited a lot of the people from Redmond City Government, Parks and Rec, some of the local leaders, just to get a chance to preview that building ahead of time. And so anyway, that happens to be the same day as our work session. So we'll be doing that and then rushing back here to start our work session an hour later. Our soft opening is, nobody's listening.
Who's online?
Is January 21st. So we have publicized January 27th. We're actually opening a week earlier, just a chance to have the staff just work through all their kinks with whoever walks into the building. And if
Trust me
there-
when I say there's more than 0 that will walk in the building that week.
Yes, people have been trying to get in that building for months now.
Yeah,
So that's
that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's the day after Martin Luther King Day. We have, for 2 weeks, we have set hours, which I'm gonna butcher, but they're about noon to 5, I think.
Noon to 6.
Noon to 6.
Monday through Thursday, noon to 5, Friday through Saturday, closed Sunday.
Yes, and so we'll be operating on that level for 2 weeks, and then on February 3rd, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll be at full operating hours. So that's a great chance. We're really looking at using those hours for the whole team to be able to meet before we open, how to go yesterday, what can we improve, and go there. It's been fun watching that team, just watching them yesterday. They're all, that's the mode they're in right now. They're out there practicing and pretending what happens. The customer comes in. I'm ready to, I think we're ready to open because we're getting to some bizarre scenarios.
Further out there.
But a big piece for us. Also, I'll add, on a personal note, where Emily was talking about the displays. I signed up for the Winter Reading Challenge. And great thing to do is we have some great displays out to help if you're looking for books to do that. It is really amazing after seeing that presentation and going through our buildings. I almost tried to kind of put on blinders because you just want to start grabbing books off the shelves, so. Yeah, so there's a plug for that, and I will leave it for the foundation news, unless there are any questions.
Oh, question, so for the Redmond grand opening,
Yes, oh yeah,
wait, when is that and what time should we be there? Should we
okay,
be there specifically for ribbon cutting, stuff like that?
Yeah, so March 7th, there's 2 actual grand opening events that you all will be invited to.
Okay, so you'll let us know.
Yeah, the first one is March 7th, it's an invite only, and that's in the evening, so from 6.
I'll get an invite to that.
You will, so 6 to 8 o'clock, and that's really for people to just kind of mingle and enjoy the space. We'll have like music and other fun entertainment there, and drinks and food, etc. The next day is the big grand opening for the public, and that's going to be from noon until 3. And that's when we hope a lot of children show up. We'll have crafts and fun activities for adults and for children. We'll allow people to do a makerspace type activity, and we're planning all that out. So, and again, lots of good music, food on that day as well. Super.
So exciting. And it'll be there before we know it. So Betsy, do you have any foundation news?
Let's see, too much news. We met last month at the Redmond Library, and it was really kind of just a celebration and an opportunity for the foundation board to see the library, and it was just lovely. So that was the first time I got to see the space, and it was just so wonderful and fun and exciting, and I keep thinking about it. So, so that's about it. Oh, actually, I guess one little bit of news is we have a new member who just joined, so that's very exciting. And I'm sorry, I forgot her name, but she works at Basics.
Basics.
I can't remember if she says it's Base X or Basics. Anyways, whatever I said was wrong, so. You
Okay.
guys know what it is.
Well, now I know how to say it. I've never known.
SpaceX just gave a donation to the capital campaign.
Oh, great.
So the timing was really nice to be able to get one of their staff members, and she works in HR too, so that's adding the HR expert on the board.
Great.
And do we have any sneak previews of any author dates?
Yes, so we hope to have 3 author dates, and I only have 2 at this moment, but February 6th, we have Willie Bloughton, so that's coming up fast. And he has just come out with a new book called The Horse, and he's a musician. A lot of his work has turned into miniseries and films and stuff, so he's an interesting guy, a really lovely man.
And I have to.
Oh, February 7th.
It's a Friday.
Okay, thank you. And then,
No, never mind. I was thinking of the grand opening was that day, but no, it's March.
That's
Sorry.
March. Okay, so then we have, the previous poet laureate, who's also a spoken word artist, an amazing, writer and performer. His name is Anis Mojani, and he's coming, we're hoping, March 6th. That's the 6th week. And it all can work out, but I haven't gotten a confirmation yet on that, so that's like a to be determined. I wanted to do a performance at the March 7th, like a poem or something to kind of bless the building.
Yeah.
But again, that's Chantal's dreams and I'm trying, he's hard to get hold of sometimes. So that's March. And then April 3rd, we have the existing poet laureate, who's Ellie Waterston, who's a local woman, writer, poet from Central Oregon. And she'll be just sharing all of her good work on April 3rd. All of those events take place at Caldera High School because Van High doesn't exist. And again, like I think I told you earlier, we're going with more like local Oregon authors to try to help to keep some of the pricing down this year because it's hard to make up the money with such a small place. You know, we won't be able to sell tickets like we can in a 1,400 seat auditorium, so. Okay.
Oh, I will say, I did put in your packets the upcoming conference schedules. Most of the ones farther out are just for your information. What I am interested in is if you are, and you can just send me an email if you're interested or thinking about attending one in, well, between now and June 30th, but also the next fiscal year. That will just help me budget. And no pressure, if you say, I plan on going to Chicago in 2026 and you don't end up going, that's fine. It's just so I have a number to put in the budget.
And I would really encourage people to take advantage of this educational opportunity because just like freedom of information, democracy depends upon informed citizens, good board work depends upon informed board members, and these conferences are incredible. Betsy got to go to ALA last year and you learn so much. It's really time well spent about national trends and national issues and things that other districts are facing. And PLA is the Public Library Association, and it's more specific to what we do, but ALA also has plenty of public library sessions, and they're both incredible opportunities, so.
Yeah, I highly recommend the public library one. And how can you pass that going to Minneapolis?
It should really be cold then still,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
it's gonna be a lovely time.
We make sure, yeah, librarians make sure that we go to wherever the weather is the worst at whatever time we go.
Yeah, there's nothing like Las Vegas right before the 4th of July.
Right.
They get really good conference rates. So I guess that's the benefit. So, with that, we don't, I think all of the critical communication regarding all these events will be handled, and I don't think there's anything else. So self-review of meeting. Erin, do you want to start?
Sure, just thank you to Emily for I just appreciated the historical context within the legal framework and just the fantastic presentation. It's always very helpful information. And then thank you to Greg and Robert for your thorough reports. As always, the information is always valuable.
Okay.
I always enjoy Emily's presentations. She just does such a good job. It's so informative. I want to get out there and tell all my friends about poetry. And Brad, thanks. Your presentation was just kind of even keel. Everything going well. I like that. And Robert, facilities. Whoa, it's just getting to be a big job there.
Yeah.
But that was
So there's few other duties, right?
No, very good meeting. Great. And as always, it's good to hear that we're on track and on budget and things are going very well. And Robert, I don't know how you do it. You know, between facilities and finances and budgets and all of that, it's always reassuring when you're giving your reports. And I really appreciated Emily's, even though I've heard her, her presentation, I always learn something new. And so I think it's one that would be valuable for the board to hear on a regular basis. I know we've been doing that, but yeah, I learn something new every time from her. So I appreciate that.
Betsy.
Well, I am just thinking about Emily's presentation, and one thing that she mentioned stood out to me that I really appreciated. And I can't remember exactly what term she gave it, but she just mentioned not being opposed to individuals bringing their concerns and their complaints. And I just that's so important to me, to make sure that our district and our staff maintain that open, welcoming, safe spaces for all folks to be able to complain and be concerned. I just really value being able to do that and being able to invite others to do that. And so that just kind of stood out to me as part of her presentation, and I appreciated that.
Right. Well, I really view, one of the best parts of this library district is the ownership that the public feels, the involvement and the passion that they have for the libraries in their communities, and they do feel free to comment, to suggest, to be part of this experience. And I think that is really important. And I think our incredible staff does work hard at making sure everybody's voice is heard, that no one feels left out of the process. And so I think we have to do an incredible job of outward facing, which is not always true of library districts. But it is very true here that everybody's operating in the best interest of the public, and what can we do to serve all our citizens in Deschutes County. So and I just echo what everyone said. I find the intellectual freedom discussion really important to have, to understand those philosophical principles and legal principles behind the policies that we've implemented to serve the people in this county. And the building reports and the facilities those are our most important assets, and knowing where we are in the process, knowing that things are going well, is as we get closer and closer to the end point, even though I know it seems a long ways out, but we really are making a lot of the final design decisions, and it's exciting. To go from that sort of discussion to seeing the actual buildings is I just have been so excited to get into these spaces, and even more to see the public using these spaces, because at every one of the grand reopenings for the branches, I mean, to just see the excitement in the community when they get into those refreshed and remodeled spaces it's really fulfilling. And that's the success, I believe, is due to the hard work of Greg and his team, the contractors, everybody that's been involved in the project, the architects, and most of all our staff, because anybody who's even built a house or done a remodel on a house knows all the level of decisions that need to get made, whether it's where does the light switch go to, do these lights have to be dimmable or not? And then when you expand that to the size of a complicated building like a library, you know how many decisions they've had to make. So Todd's in now a great position to be able to build whatever building. He never wants to see any of this again. So thank you. Todd, you need to weigh in, sorry.
Oh, yeah, just reminder, next month we're meeting here.
Okay.
And next month I also share with you the calendar for the year, so you'll have we're finally getting a better sense of where we'll be able to land for the meeting, so we'll have that. Also, Feel free to critique our setup today. I kind of felt like I was on a Senate hearing. And I'm the one set up, trying to find a way to have our speakers have a spot, so.
Right.
And yeah, that's it. I share the same on all the presentations. I've probably heard intellectual freedom presentations over the last 35 years, and I never get tired of it, because it's like you said, there's always something, and it's just reassuring to know that when we have that, we have the confidence when somebody comes up, it's more of a discussion rather than, oh my God, panic moment. And so that's really helpful, just having that reassurance over and over.
And I would love to get copies of those slides.
You will get copies of the slides.
Both presentations, yeah,
Yes,
that would be great.
they'll be in your next packet.
Okay, well, I'm going to adjourn us until Friday, so see you all in a few days. Thank you.
Outside.